In 1950, roughly 1 American in 6 lived on a farm. 20 years later, it was closer to 1 in 20. An entire way of growing up vanished inside a single generation, and almost nobody bothered to write it down. If you were a farm kid in the 1950s, you learned to work before you learned to read. You knew the sound of a cream separator winding down, the smell of a haymow in August, and exactly which pages of the Sears catalog were the softest. Number 14 will make anyone who ever carried a lunch pail down a gravel road go quiet. Number 3 changed everything overnight. And number 1 is the one nobody brings up at family reunions. Hit subscribe. If this was your childhood, let us count down, starting with number 25. Number 25. You were awake before the rooster, and you resented him for taking credit. Milking started somewhere between 4:30 and 5 in the morning, and it did not care that it was February or that you were 9 years old, or that the thermometer nailed to the porch post read 4 degrees. You pulled on bib overalls over your pajamas, stepped into boots stiff with cold, and walked out into a dark so complete it felt like a physical thing pressing on your face. The barn was the reward. 20 cows breathing in a closed space kept it near 50 degrees, and the smell of silage, warm milk, and cattle hit you like a wool blanket. You sat on a one-legged stool, pressed your forehead into a cow's flank, and worked until your forearms burned. Then you went inside, ate breakfast, and walked to school. That was Tuesday. That was every Tuesday. Number 24. Your school clothes came off a chicken feed sack. Flour and feed companies figured out in the 1930s that farm women were cutting up their plain cotton sacks for cloth, so they started printing them, florals, gingham, little repeating cowboys, and put the brand name on in ink that washed out with lye soap. A 100-pound sack was a rectangle of good percale, and 3 matching sacks made a dress. So the trip to the feed mill became a negotiation. Your mother would stand in the warehouse, pulling sacks around, hunting for 3 of the same pattern, while the mill hands waited. If someone else had already taken the 3rd one, the whole dress was off. Girls learned to read a bolt of cloth for quality by the time they were 8. Nobody was embarrassed. Everyone in the schoolhouse was wearing the same thing. Number 23. The telephone rang for everybody, and everybody listened. Fewer than 4 in 10 American farms had a telephone in 1950, and the ones that did shared a line, sometimes with 8 or 10 other families. Your ring was a pattern, 2 longs and a short, and you learned it the way you learned your own name. When the crank handle turned somewhere down the road, every phone on the line rang, and half the county quietly lifted the receiver and put a hand over the mouthpiece. Everybody knew. That was the arrangement. If a barn caught fire or a baby came early, the whole line heard it in the same minute, and pickups were rolling before the call ended. The privacy was terrible. The response time was better than anything we have now. You cannot call 911 and get 11 neighbors already coming. Number 22. The Sears catalog had 2 jobs, and the second one was in the outhouse. Roughly 2 out of 3 farms had no indoor plumbing at the start of the decade, so the path out back was worn into the grass, and in January, you did not linger. The catalog arrived free in the mail, 600 pages of tractors, wringer washers, and men modeling long underwear, and after the family had spent a season circling things they were never going to order, it graduated to the little building. The slick color pages were useless, and everybody knew it. You went for the black and white index pages in the back, thin, soft, and plentiful. Kids fought over the wish book in the fall the way kids now fight over a screen. Then it did its second tour of duty, and by spring it was gone, and the new one had come. Number 21. Saturday night was bath night, and you wanted to go first. Water came up from a hand pump or a cistern by the bucket, got carried in, and got heated on the cook stove in a copper boiler. That was an hour of labor for one tub of hot water, so nobody wasted it on a single child. The galvanized wash tub came off the porch nail and went in the middle of the kitchen floor near the stove, and the family went through it in order, youngest and cleanest first, oldest and dirtiest last. By the fourth kid, the water was gray and cooling fast. You did your hair with the same water and a bar of homemade lye soap that took the top layer off. Then you were clean for church, and you stayed clean because you were not going to see hot water again until the next Saturday. Number 20. One teacher, 8 grades, one wood stove. There were still around 60,000 one-room schools operating in the United States in 1950, most of them in farm country, and yours probably sat on a corner of somebody's donated field. One teacher, often 19 or 20 years old, with 2 years of normal school, taught every grade in the same room. The genius of it was accidental. 6th graders overheard the 3rd grade lesson and remembered it. 3rd graders overheard the 6th grade lesson and got ahead. Big kids carried in coal and split kindling, and the seats closest to the stove were currency. Lunch was in a lard pail, a jar of soup set on the stove ledge at 9 so it would be warm by noon. Consolidation swallowed nearly all of them by 1965. Farm kids who lived it will still tell you they learned more in that room than their grandchildren learn in a wing. Number 19. Butchering day came after the first hard freeze, and the whole family had a job. You waited for cold weather, because cold weather was the refrigeration. Neighbors traded off, 3 or 4 families rotating through each other's places across November and December, so there were always enough hands. The men handled the heavy work outside. Inside, the women ran a small factory, grinding sausage, mixing sage and black pepper by feel, rendering lard in a big kettle until the kitchen windows ran with steam. Kids turned the grinder crank until their shoulders ached and got paid in crackling straight out of the pot, salted and too hot to hold. Hams and bacon went into the smokehouse. Lard went into stone crocks. Nothing was thrown away, because throwing it away meant buying it back in February. By dark, a family had most of a winter's protein hanging in the smokehouse, and every child in the yard had watched exactly where their food came from. Number 18. The cream can at the end of the lane was the family paycheck. Every morning the milk was run through the separator, and every morning that separator had to be taken apart and washed, 40-some conical discs, one at a time, in scalding water. That job went to whichever kid was tall enough to reach the sink. The cream went into 10-gallon cans, and the cans went out to a wooden stand at the end of the driveway, and the hauler came through before the heat came up. Days later, a check came back in the mail, and that check was the light bill, the shoes, the seed corn. You learned the price of butterfat the way city kids learned batting averages. And you learned what a docked can meant, because if the cream tested sour or the can wasn't clean, that was your washing job showing up in your family's income. Number 17, EGG money was your mother's money, and everyone respected it. Chickens belonged to the woman of the house. That was not written down anywhere, and it was never argued about. Kids gathered eggs twice a day, reaching under hens that would flog your forearm, then washed and candled them, holding each one up to a light to check the inside. The eggs went to town in wire crates and came back as store credit, and out of that credit came sugar, coffee, thread, shoes, and sometimes something wildly frivolous like a bottle of vanilla extract. When farm prices collapsed and the crop check disappeared, the egg money did not. Farm women carried whole families through 1953 and 1954 on hens. Ask anyone who grew up in that kitchen, and they will tell you plainly that the flock, not the field, was what kept the lights on. Number 16. The barn cats were not pets, but you named them anyway. Nobody bought cat food. The barn cats worked for rats, and their wages were a saucer of warm milk squirted straight from the cow at morning milking, which every farm kid learned to aim from 6 feet away. They lived in the hay, had kittens in the hay, and you would find a nest of them behind a straw bale in April and not tell anyone for a week because you knew perfectly well what the number of cats on a farm had to stay under. You named them all. Your father pretended not to know the names and then used them. This was the first hard arithmetic of a farm childhood, that you could love something completely and still not be able to keep it, and that nobody was going to sit you down and explain it. Number 15. The haymow was the best room you will ever have. 50 feet of open space under a peaked roof, filled in July with square bales stacked to the rafters, and the whole thing smelled like sun and dust and cut clover. You built tunnels through it. You swung on the rope that hung from the track for the hay fork and dropped into loose hay from a height that would give a modern parent a stroke. You went up there to read, to hide, to get out of the wind, to have the only private conversation available to a child in a house with 6 people and no interior doors that closed. It was also genuinely dangerous, and every farm kid knew a story. Nobody supervised. Nobody knew where you were until the bell rang, and that was normal. And it was the closest thing to freedom that generation would ever get. Number 14. The dinner bell meant now, not soon. Dinner was at noon, and dinner was the big meal, because the work happened in daylight and men burned 5,000 calories doing it. The bell on the pole outside the kitchen door carried better than a mile across open ground, and when it rang, the field stopped. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, home-canned green beans with bacon grease, 3 kinds of pickles, bread and pie. Always PIE. A farm woman produced that spread on a wood cook stove in July with no air conditioning, and then did it again for supper. Kids ate at the second table if company came, which meant watching the chicken supply dwindle while you waited. Everyone came in from the field for that meal every single day, not a weekend ritual. Tuesday. The family ate together twice a day because the work made it happen, and nobody thought it was special. Number 13. Your summer job started at 7 and paid by the ace-year. Walking beans meant a corn knife, a hoe, or your bare hands, and a mile-long row of soybeans with buttonweed and cocklebur hiding in it. You went down the row, you came back up the next one, and the field did not appear to shrink. Detasseling corn for the hybrid seed companies was the big money version, and by the mid-1950s, teenagers were riding out on flatbeds at dawn all across the Corn Belt, arms cut to ribbons by leaves, soaked to the chest with dew before 8, then baked. Pay was often around $6 or $7 a day, which bought a lot in 1956. That check bought your school clothes, your first watch, sometimes a car by 16. Nobody gave a farm kid an allowance. You were paid for production, and you understood the difference before you were 12. Number 12. Your calf had a number, a record book, and a show halter. 4-H membership ran to roughly 2 million kids in the 1950s, and in farm country it was closer to universal than optional. You got a project animal in the spring. You fed it, weighed it, halter broke it, washed it, and kept a record book with feed costs and gains in pencil, which was the first accounting anyone ever taught you. Then came the county fair in August, the smell of sawdust and popcorn and cattle, the sweat down the back of a white show shirt, a judge walking the line with his hands behind his back, and then the sale, where your calf sold to the grocery store owner and you got the check, and you cried in the truck on the way home and did it again the next year. That was a business education, a public speaking course, and a lesson in loss, all before high school. Number 11. The 4th of July was the only day you tasted ice cream. The freezer was a wooden bucket with a metal canister inside, and the custard was real cream and eggs and sugar cooked on the stove that morning. Ice came from town in a burlap-wrapped block, got broken up with an ice pick, and got layered in with rock salt. Then somebody had to crank, and that somebody was you, for 30 or 40 minutes, while the handle got harder and harder to turn, and the adults told you that meant it was working. The youngest kid sat on top of the freezer wrapped in a gunny sack to hold it steady. When the crank finally stopped moving, the dasher came out and whoever was closest got to lay it. Peach, if the orchard had come in. There was no store to run to. You waited a whole year for that bowl. Number 10. August meant the kitchen was 200 degrees and nobody was allowed to complain. Canning season was not a hobby. It was the difference between eating in February and not. Tomatoes, beans, corn, beets, peaches, pickles, and whatever the garden threw at you all at once, processed in a boiling water bath or a pressure canner on a wood stove in the worst heat of the year. Kids snapped beans by the dishpan, shelled peas, peeled peaches, and stirred. A good farm family put up 500, 600, sometimes 800 quarts in a season, and the cellar shelves went from bare in June to solid glass by September. You could stand at the cellar door in October and see the whole winter lined up in rows. There is no modern feeling that compares to it, and no grocery store that has ever given anyone that particular sense of safety. Number 9. Trash was a concept that had not been invented yet. There was no pickup. There was a burn barrel behind the machine shed, a 55-gallon drum with holes punched in the sides, and paper and cardboard went in it once a week, usually with a kid assigned to watch it. Ash went on the garden or the icy driveway. Bones and scraps went to the hogs or the dogs. Glass jars got washed and reused until they broke. Baling twine got coiled and hung on a nail, and there was always more of it than anyone could ever use. Broken machinery went to the grove out back, which was the family junkyard and also the best playground on the property. A 1950s farm family generated almost nothing to throw away, not because they were virtuous, but because everything cost money and nothing was disposable yet. Number 8. You remember the exact night the lights came on. In 1935, only about 1 farm in 10 in America had electricity. By the early 1950s, thanks to the Rural Electrification Administration and the local co-ops, it was around 3 and 4, and if your place was on the tail end of a line, that switch got flipped while you were old enough to remember it. People talk about it like a birthday. The bare bulb in the kitchen ceiling came on and the room looked unfamiliar, brighter and shabbier at once. No more filling and trimming kerosene lamps every evening. No more carrying a lamp up dark stairs. Then came the electric pump and the refrigerator and the washing machine that did not require a hand wringer, and the workload of every farm woman in America fell off a cliff inside of 5 years. Kids watched their mothers get their lives back. Number 7. The radio ran the day, and the markets ran the mood. There was one radio, and it sat in the kitchen or the front room, and it was on at specific times only. 6 in the morning for weather, because weather was money. Noon for the farm markets, and everyone at that dinner table went quiet while a man read the closing prices on hogs and corn, and you learned to read your father's whole month off his face during those 90 seconds. Then in the evening, the good stuff. WLS out of Chicago, WSM and the Grand Ole Opry on Saturday night. Comedy and dramas that a whole family sat around and stared at a wooden box to hear. Kids did homework on the kitchen table in the same room. Nobody had headphones. Whatever anybody was listening to, everybody was listening to. Number 6. Threshing Day was Thanksgiving, a barn raising, and a track meet at the same time. Before combines finished taking over, the threshing machine came through the neighborhood, and every farm in the ring worked every other farm's grain. 15 or 20 men, wagons, teams, dust, and a machine belted to a tractor that roared all day. And the women ran a field kitchen. Fried chicken and beef, potatoes, pies by the dozen, gallons of iced tea and lemonade, served in shifts at tables set up in the yard, with a washstand and a mirror and a towel on the porch rail so the crew could clean up. Kids hauled water jugs to the field all day and got to eat with the men. It was hot, filthy, exhausting work, and everyone who lived through it describes it as the best week of the year, because for 1 week, the whole neighborhood was one household. Number 5. You watched your father sell the horses, and you saw his face. America had something like 12 million horses and mules working its farms in the mid-1940s. By 1960, it was down near 3 million. The 1950s were where that happened, and on your farm, it happened on one particular day. The Farmall or the John Deere came into the yard, green or red and impossibly loud, and everybody stood around it. Then a few weeks or a few seasons later, the team went to the sale barn. Those horses had names, they had personalities. Your father had walked behind them for 15 years and knew which one favored a foot. He did not say anything about it, because men of that generation did not. But every farm kid who was there remembers that he stayed out in the barn a long time that evening. The tractor was better. That was never the question. Number 4. Summer had a shadow over it, and its name was polio. The worst year was 1952, with around 58,000 cases in the United States, most of them children. Farm families were not spared, and rural isolation was small comfort. So the rules came down every June. Stay out of the creek, stay out of the stock tank, no county fair midway, no swimming hole, no crowds, no matter how hot it got. Mothers watched for a stiff neck the way they watched a storm cloud. Kids saw the photographs in Life magazine and knew exactly what an iron lung was. Then, the Salk vaccine came in 1955, and in schoolhouses across farm country, kids lined up in the hallway for a shot, and the summers slowly turned back into summers. Every person who grew up then remembers that line. It is one of the few times a generation felt the ground move under it for the better. Number 3. The mailbox at the end of the road was the whole outside world. Rural free delivery meant a car came down the gravel once a day, and a kid was sent out to meet it, sometimes a half mile each way. In that box was everything: the Sears catalog, the Capper's Weekly or the county paper, the letter from the cousin who moved to Detroit for factory work, which the whole family would read out loud at supper, the cream check, the seed catalogs in January, which farm kids read like novels through a snowstorm, and occasionally the envelope nobody wanted from the bank or the county. Walking back up that lane With the mail in your arms, you were carrying the family's entire news cycle. Kids now get more information in 10 seconds than a farm family got in a week, and somehow it lands with less weight. Number 2, the neighbor's auction sale taught you what could happen to you. There were about 5.4 million farms in America in 1950. By the end of the decade, there were closer to 3.7 million. That difference had a sound, and the sound was an auctioneer. On a Saturday in the spring, cars would line both sides of a gravel road, and everything a family owned would be laid out in rows in the yard. Tools on hay racks, the tractor, the milk cans, the kitchen chairs, the wife's canning jars and flats. Neighbors came, and they bid honestly, and some of them quietly bid a little high on purpose. The family stood by the porch and watched. Kids understood immediately, without being told, that this was not an event, but a wound. And every farm kid there did the math on the way home about their own place. Number 1, almost every one of you left, and the farm did not. That is the thing nobody says out loud at the reunion. The 1950s did not just change American farming, it emptied the American countryside. Tractors and hybrid seed and better chemistry meant one family could farm what 4 families used to farm, and there was no longer a place at home for 4 sons. So the kids went to Chicago, to Detroit, to the service, to the state college on a $100 scholarship, to town jobs with a paycheck every 2 weeks and hot water whenever you wanted it. Their parents pushed them out on purpose because the whole point of the work was that their children would not have to do it. It succeeded completely. And that is why the people who understand this list are the last ones who will, and why the barn is gone and the grove is still standing. That childhood ran on cold mornings, hard work, and neighbors who showed up without being called, and it produced a generation that never once thought it was remarkable. If you lived it, tell me the one thing on this list that put you right back in that kitchen. And tell me what I missed, because I know there is something, there always is. Drop it in the comments and go call somebody who was there while you still can.